In 3, 2, 1.
I've been ripped up, roughed up, and run right out of town. I've been pulled to the top and then dropped right on the ground, but I'm rolling. Yeah, I'm rolling. There ain't nothing I can lose, and I sure got the blues, so I'm rolling.
Hello and welcome to Talking Headless. I'm your host, Paul Greenberg. And you know what? Let's get into it. All right, everyone. Welcome to segment 1 of Talking Headless. It's called, Hey, What's Going On? Segment 1 is normally where I would be doing reports on the news, like stuff about that's going on in the industry or that are at least interesting and maybe not directly related to the industry, but has some bearing on it. And I would talk to my thinking on the news. You know what? Because this is the pilot episode, it's July, we're not launching the network till September. I'm going to just tell you more in this segment. Instead of the news, I'm going to tell you more about the podcast itself so you know how it's structured, how it's going to look, and what we're going to be doing throughout the podcast. And then the remaining segments will be actual segments that you will hear in the fall. The subject matter will be the same. This is the only one we're going to vary. So rather than the news, I'm going to tell you what the podcast is all about. So what is it all about? I know a lot of me from CRM world, which for those of you who don't know me, or the CRM world, that stands for Customer Relationship Management. In that universe, I've been called the Godfather of CRM. My book on it, CRM Speed of Light, has been called the Bible of CRM. I've written another book on customer engagement called The Commonwealth of Self-Interest. I've spoken at about 1 trillion conferences, both live and virtual and hybrid. I have done podcasts in the past. I've written tons of material formerly on ZDNet, just getting started on mycustomer.com. So I've been around the block. Actually, they call me the Godfather of CRM, but I really think they mean the grandfather of CRM because I'm the oldest guy in the industry. Francis Buttle, who is a great CRM consultant, is 1 year older than me. He's 73, I'm 72. So Francis Butler is the oldest person I know in the CRM-ish world, at least on the consultative side. Then there's me, and then there's Rich Bone, as he puts it, the oldest living independent CRM consultant. And he wants to keep the title, it's fine. What I'm going to do with this podcast, because I am an industry analyst, I advise a lot of tech companies. I am going to be an industry analyst and an advisor to more than just tech companies as this goes on. So we're going to break this out into 4 segments. Segment 1, which is the one we're in now, which is called Hey, What's Going On, is basically news. Every episode, I will go through 3, 4 news items, talk to what I think about X, Y, or Z, be relatively snarky. As you probably note, you can hear a fairly thick New York accent, given that I no longer live in New York and haven't for 5 decades. So thick relative to that. So I will be every bit a New Yorker, and at varying times I will be, let's just say, mean, and I've got things related to that, or I will be positive, and I will always, though, have a suggestion on how to improve. And what's going on in the news, I'll give you my commentary. Segment 2, which is called Don't Get Me Started, is actually an opinion segment, right? Where I'll be giving you my opinion on something, let's say topic of the day, topic du jour, what maybe needs to be changed, what needs to be supported, why this is not a really good way to think about something, why this is a really good way to think about something, why this is something that, say, vendors or practitioners, buyers or sellers need to actually do. It could be a playbook of some kind. And it will be on customer-facing topics or topics that just tend to interest me. And it could be on not directly customer-facing topics, be on the relationship of supply chain and CX, for example. Who knows? We'll see when we get to it. And there, again, I will be nice, I will be mean, but you will know either way. Segment 3 is entitled, Wait, What? And it's basically definitional. Look, one of the things that characterizes our industry, and I know you've seen this a million times, is that everyone has a definition that's typically self-interested for a concept that is actually universally used in the world of enterprise technology, small business technology, business in general, etc. So, for example, always hot word for the last, let's call it 5 or 6 years, maybe even longer, has been customer experience, CX. Actually, if you want to really take it back, it's been a frequently used word since Joe Pine wrote The Experience Economy back in, I believe it was 1998, maybe 96, first edition, second edition of the book 2011. Still highly recommend you get both editions. In the meantime, CX, though, when you read it, it's pretty much one of two things. And I'm not going to go through details. I'm just using this as an explanation. You see a definition that's tailored to the company that's producing technology or producing or providing a service, so their definition reflects the service or the product that they produce. It's not a universally acceptable definition, it's a self-interested one. Or it's fairly vapid in terms of things like it's a generic statement that doesn't have much substance. The idea is to come through with a definition that provides clarity, that can be used, and it is not a self-interested definition. I have no stake in the definition of CX per se at all, because I'm not producing a product or a service that relies on it. Plus, I'm not built to do that. I'm built to basically, I'm an English and journalism major, so I'm built to explain and listen and explain some more and listen some more. That's how I'm built. So this will be, I hope, a segment where we can provide some clarity on a particular phrase or word or concept that's out there that's devoid of self-aggrandizement, narcissism, and self-interest. Segment 4, which is entitled Out of the Box, is actually a segment where we're going to talk about and score trends that are starting to surface. And you'll see one that we'll talk about today. And in that, we're going to look at the trend, we're going to identify the trend, we're going to discuss the validity of the trend and see if it has any actual legs and is something that's sustainable, or that it's something that needs to become sustainable, or it's just going to die on the vine because it's a fad, really, and not much more than that. And it's something that people want to say because they sound cool saying it, or they sound hip saying it, or they sound learned and educated saying it. And that would be segment 4. So segment 1, news. Segment 2, opinion. Segment 3, definition. Segment 4, trend. And we will score, by the way, in segment 4, the trend. And it's just the likelihood of stickiness, basically. How the likelihood of the trend actually having an impact over an extended period of time. And that's what it's going to look like. And next time you hear this music, you'll know that's basically the news coming up and what's going on. So with that, you know what? I'd like to say I'd take a smoke break, but I don't smoke and never have. So basically, I'm just going to take a short break, maybe 10, 15 seconds, and then we'll get right down to Don't Get Me Started.
What they used to tell me every day, caught a few along the way, don't be afraid if you gotta lose one. I'm trying to take it higher, the boy is on fire, he preaching to the choir that never been a liar, the boy is on fire, I'll take it to the wire, you know that.
So welcome to segment 2. This is Takin to the Wire, which was actually a command decision I made on the spot about 2 seconds ago. What I'm going to do in this segment, as I mentioned in the first segment, will be, it's an opinion piece, but it's where I get to talk about companies and people and things going on that are, let's call it, universal. And it's basically, I get to be a hardcore industry analyst. And I decided what I want to do is, as many for the last 20 years, and this will be the last year of this, I have been doing an industry award called the CRM Watchlist. And the CRM Watchlist 2022 was based on the activity throughout 2021 up to and including, if you want, December 31st, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. And based on the submissions that I would get, which is a look at the impact your company had in the prior year or over the prior year, and the potential for that impact to continue over a 3-year period. You won, and you could be an elite, you could be a with distinction, you could be a winner, or just you lost. Most companies don't win. All right. This year, among the winners, we had Zoho Corporation, and Zoho was the highest scoring winner with distinction. There were no elites. A winner with distinction this year. And what I've decided to do through taking it to the wire will be to talk about the winning companies and the submissions and the things that they could do moving forward. So the question is, why does Zoho Corporation become the leading scorer of the CRM Watchlist 2022? Why? And there's a big why associated with this, really. When I'm doing the watch list, I'm looking at companies as companies. I'm not looking just at the technology you provide. I'm looking at the public service you provide. I'm looking at your financials. I'm looking at the partnerships and alliances strategies. I'm looking at the hardcore outreach that you do. I'm looking at the impact you've had in the market and also across business in general via PR. And I'm looking at the marketing strategies. I'm looking at your media strategies. I'm looking at a dozen, in fact, 13 questions. And ultimately, if you count the sub questions, about 90 questions that we're looking for answers for when we're judging the results. And in order to win, because I am not a very nice person, in fact, I'm a complete jerk when it comes to the watch list, in order to win, you really have to prove it to me that you had an impact. And if you can't prove it, even if you actually had it and you can't prove it, then I'm going to take it for granted that you didn't have it. That's how mean I am. Normally, I'll trust you before I'll distrust you. In the case of this, if you don't prove it, you don't get it. And if you lose in the scoring system by 1/10 of a point, you know what? Then you lose. I don't care. You could literally be a family member and it wouldn't matter. You still lose. So how does Zoho score the highest? Well, understand, Zoho is a company that's been in existence for 26 years. It came into existence way back when, and when I say way back when, in roughly 2005. I'm sorry, that's wrong. In 96, it came into existence, and by 2005 had established a presence with pretty much just two applications. One was Zoho CRM, which is how I ran across them, and Zoho Mail, which I didn't really know much at the time. Now, the interesting thing is I've known them 21 of their 26 years, but the reality is I only knew one or two employees for a long time, and I actually thought that was all the employees the company had at one point. It was so stealthy in terms of what they were doing, and there was a reason for that, as it turns out, over time. They're a company that was founded in India, has a presence in many countries across the world. Now, what's amazing about Zoho is they started their life as a small business-focused company, and starting in roughly with those two applications, and by 2021, they had over 50 applications, and not only were small business, but were strongly focused and had pretty deeply penetrated the mid-market. There's some inklings and signs, which is that they're going to go up market even further to the enterprise, and we'll talk about that briefly later when we get to what do they have to do to extend their impact. But right now, I'd say the power lies in small business and in the mid-market, and they've proven their case greatly. Now, what's fascinating about them from a technology standpoint, although it's not the most important thing with this specific company, and I'll explain why in just a moment, their technology is astonishing in that it literally it basically comes together as a complete business operating system. And again, different than Windows or Mac OS. That's basically a computer operating system. This is a business operating system, meaning those 50 applications are tightly stitched together. They are unified as a whole, but you have the ability to use any one of the 50 or all 50 that you want. And if you choose to go the route, you can actually buy the whole suite, the whole Zoho One, which is what it's called, which means you're basically buying their ecosystem for $39.95 per user per month, which is an astonishing price. And let's say you only want to use 4 of them because you're a small company and you don't have a whole lot of complexity built in, you switch them on. And let's say you grow and grow, and there's another 17 you want to use, and yet two of the four you no longer want to use. You turn those two off, you turn the 17 on. And the interconnectedness and mesh of that ecosystem of Zoho One is retained throughout the course of it. So now, as they have grown as a company, they've taken the technology, and again, it ranges from CRM and mail to, and when I say CRM, it covers a wide range of CRM, and also, I'll call it CX. It's really customer engagement, but everyone in their mother decides they want to call it CX these days. But it's really engagement technologies, and it's a wide range. And it goes from the core technologies like Salesforce automation, customer service, marketing automation, but it also includes some of the add-ons and the value adds of the CRM world, like web self-service or sales performance management or mobile CRM or community and collaboration platforms. And more recently, very, very capable journey management, journey orchestration platform addition to the functionality and technology that they offer overall in Zoho One. They also have the more ancillary things that are used within very specific applications, conversational interfaces, chatbots, and you name it. They have HR and finance on the back end, obviously not the main focus of my life, but at the same time, they have them. So they encompass a completely interconnected business operating system. And the other thing about it is, and this is more my way of describing it, it's a hardened business operating system, meaning, for example, they take privacy and security very seriously. So, for example, typically if you're looking at Meta, aka Facebook, or another social platform, they'll tend to extract data from you as well as provide data for you or to you. And in Zoho, if you're doing that within Zoho, or you're using Meta, let's say, for something, or you're using Twitter for something, you can shut off the ability of Twitter or Meta/Facebook. You can shut their ability to capture your data off completely. This is a hardened operating system. You can take this, drop it in, and honestly, it'll work really well for your organization. Again, I'm focused here on small business to the mid-market. Enterprise has a different set. They have some capabilities that support that, and they have some customers that prove their ability to be in the enterprise, but there are some things that they're going to still have to do, which we'll get to. But that's just the technology, and I don't really want to get in deeply into the technology. I really want to get more into what is it that distinguishes them and makes them the number one scorer this year. And honestly, one of the best companies I've ever known. Now, we could go on the level of specific strategies, their marketing strategies or their outreach, and their outreach programs, which are led by the indomitable Sandy Lowe, who I've known for a long time, one of the best I've ever known in the business. Their analyst relations programs, their PR and communications programs are exceptional. And they have a very broad and deep high regard in the analyst community. For example, and just show you how advanced their programs become, in 2018, before they really had a solid analyst program, there were only 2 analysts at their annual Zoho user conference and the 2 analysts were me and Brent Leary, who of course is, aside from being one of my best friends, is my partner in Playaz Productions Network and in CRM Playaz. And that was it. Now, with Zoho Day in 2022, there are about 100 analysts at the event from all over the world, right? Their Analyst Day, 100. That's the difference between 2018 and 2022, as they've emerged from stealth, as Sandy got the programs going, as they've invested in the time and effort necessary to build out the outreach. They have done a remarkable job. But why the goodwill? Why the incredible goodwill among the analyst community? Because we're a testy lot, man. I mean, we're really testy, in fact, and we can be just basic jerks, really, often enough, because sometimes we think it's God's word on high that we're providing, and other times we're recognizing, no, it's really just an opinion with some chops behind it, but it's still an opinion. So, what is it that gets the universal goodwill? It's the nature of the company itself. When the company was founded by Sridhar Vembu, who's one of the leading names in India and one and arguably the most dedicated in service of mankind CEO I have ever met. And if you're interested in watching him today, along with this show, you can see Engaged with Paul and Kenny. You can find it on the YouTube channel, or you can find it on LinkedIn or elsewhere on the PPN Playaz Productions Network page. You'll see an interview with Sridhar that Kenny Lauer, who's my partner on Engaged with Paul and Kenny, did for the pilot of our new show. Sridhar, when he founded this, had always focused on the idea of the purpose of a company is to provide service to the world. And we know that Mark Benioff and Salesforce have that as a part of their commitment too. It's not but, they take different approaches. The thing with this company specifically is they are willing to leave money on the table if they don't feel that there's a service benefit. When I say that, again, global service benefit to the world or to the company or to the segment of the population that they feel they must serve. They're literally willing to walk away from deals that they feel are valueless when it comes to that kind of value. So what do I mean by when I say that, and how does that manifest itself? There's two ways. Way one is just the individual stuff they always do. Look, Sridhar alone and Zoho, at one point during the beginning of COVID in India, Zoho and Sridhar were feeding up to 100,000 people a day just to keep them have enough food to get through the day. That's just the sheer volume of activity. And think about that's per day. Okay, but they're even bigger than that in the way they think and the way they operate too. They've come up with a concept that they call transnational localism that I buy into big time. I think, in fact, it is something that is transformative in every sense of the word, and also highlights the commitment that Zoho has to betterment of the human species and improvement of what's good and solution to what problems need to be solved. So what's an example of that? I'll give you a U.S. example to highlight it, because they've basically taken principles and activities that they've successfully accomplished in India and then reapplied them to the United States. You go back a few years and they decided that they would apply to the U.S. something they've done very well in India called Zoho University. In India, Zoho University basically says, hi, not only are we going to find young people of talent, but we are going to train them at our expense. And because those young people in India are often the breadwinners of the family, we're going to pay the family while we're training at no expense to them, their kids, and we're going to give those kids a job. And there were over 1,500 Zoho employees who were trained on that from the India side. They replicated that in the US, but they decided to take it even further. And about a year and a half ago, they began looking at things in a very different light. So right now, for example, Zoho's US headquarters are in Austin, Texas. But Austin's it's a small city relative to New York or San Francisco, but it's a city. And it radiates out, and it's got metro areas, and there's a lot of technology talent and other talent inside the city limits. Again, those are what city limits is in Austin. We'll get the reference, although never mind, but you'll get it. Anyway, but what they decided to do is to go to towns that were well outside the radius and start not only finding and training talent for Zoho, but finding out what the area is suited for and what they could do to support the area, and then training people for that area. So, for example, they opened an office recently in McAllen, Texas. And the McAllen, Texas office, they have one I'm blocking where in Mexico it is, but also in, I think maybe some town outside Mexico City, but don't hold me to that. It's in Mexico. But McAllen, Texas, they opened an office and they began looking around. And not only are they training people in technology and providing them with jobs and skills, but they're supporting the town by building infrastructure. So they might be building a farm where they're training people in agriculture. They might be building a city center. I'm not being specific to McAllen here. They might be building a city center, but they are actually supporting the town, not just in providing jobs and opening an office in this, let's call it semi-rural area. Rural, it's not truly rural, but its area around it is. But they're supporting and developing infrastructure. And in fact, if I'm looking at Zoho over time with the concept of transnational localism, by going out into these more remote areas and starting to support these people in their efforts, you're talking about something that is of dramatic impact in places in the United States that, or India, or wherever they decide to do transnational localism. They're starting to literally build out areas that otherwise could fall into poverty, but instead will become booming areas where, with jobs available, income flowing, and getting people who might be on the borderlines of poverty out of poverty, or might be just lower income to higher incomes, and beginning to actually help them build a substantial family life. In fact, Zoho itself as a company is beginning to evolve almost to an infrastructure company where the software, like the Zoho One and the business operating system, are just part of that overall infrastructural development that they're providing. And that's why Zoho tends to win, because they are putting their money, their labor, time, and making the efforts to better people, as well as provide a business that has very mysterious numbers, but analysts estimate anywhere from 800 million to $1 billion, but that's just analyst estimates. They don't really say what it is. So you're talking about a company that wins because of their global efforts, or let's say is the highest scorer, not just because of their incredible technology offering, but also their commitment to mankind and the betterment of the species, and actually building out not just designing the programs, but implementing the programs that are necessary to make it better. Now, what is it that they're going to have to do to improve on at least their business if they decide to go upstream to the enterprise? Because the enterprise is always a very different beast than, say, mid-market and certainly than small business. And I'm just going to suggest a couple of things right now, just in the interest of time, since this originally was supposed to be a half-hour podcast and is now well over an hour. Number one, make sure your staff is tuned to the enterprise. For example, enterprise sales are very different than any other sales imaginable. You can't just say, okay, we'll train people in trials by fire when it comes to enterprise sales. You've got to bring in a staff that has done that, and then they can work with others to train them. But that staff that has done that has to be the ones who start selling. That's number one. Number two is, in Zoho's case, it will require, I think, a bit more from the standpoint of building out not just partnerships and alliances along the lines they have now. They have a very strong partner network, but it tends to be more on the level of evaluated resellers and partners who are designing Zoho off the Zoho platform into Zoho specific apps related to possibly specific industries or specific, let's call them horizontal needs, things like that. But in this case, I'm talking more strategic partnerships where you're co-developing and co-designing to accomplish something specific in a larger ecosystem. Now, I think that if you're going to get to the enterprise, you're going to need more of those kind of connections. Is there anything else? Sure, but I'll leave that to discussions I have with Zoho directly. Those are just two things I think that in order for them to go up market, they're going to have to do. Because honestly, in terms of where they are right now, this is a company that I can't say anything but really wonderful things about, because of the quality of their humanity first, and then the quality and design of their engineering, and their commitment to building the kind of culture and partnerships, or the culture and at least ecosystems that are necessary to put all this in place. And I'll tell you what, that's my thoughts, that's my opinions, and congratulations to Zoho for being the highest scorer, a winner with distinction on the CRM Watchlist 2022. If you're interested in applying for the CRM Watchlist 2023, send me an email at all lowercase paul-greenberg3 at the56group.com and request a CRM Watchlist 2023 registration form. This is going to be the 20th year and final year of the CRM Watchlist, so I suggest that if you do it now. Thanks, and I'll see you shortly in our next segment. Welcome to Wait, What? Segment where we actually define definitions for things that need clarity in our industry. I figured to begin this, given that we are defining PPN as a influencer-focused digital broadcasting network, that maybe it would be a good idea to look at and help define the word influencer, the concept of influencer. And as simple as we think the subject may be, it's really not that simple. And we'll get into what that means in the next 7 or 8 minutes. I started actually by looking at the Oxford Dictionary to find out what would be the simplest, most common universal definition that's out there. And I'll tell you this, man, Oxford came up really short. This was actually their first definition. An influencer is a person or thing, well, I'm wondering what an influencer thing is, that influences another, which is literally like saying a human being is a being that's human. It's literally a meaningless definition that doesn't help you with anything. Ultimately, look, we're looking at a pretty complicated subject because most of us know the word influencer, and there are a lot of people out there either claiming to be influencers or who are influencers, but in reality, they're not doing what influencers should do or being what influencers should be, which is providing information of value to the people listening to them or subscribing to them or admiring them, nor are they subject matter experts in any way, shape, or form about what they are promoting. And the problem is that they are promoting, because a lot of influencers are pretty much doing what they do, defined from their personal self-interest. And when I say that, it's this way. If I'm a brand influencer, oftentimes I'm endorsing a brand because A, I'm being paid to do it, or B, I want their products and I want them to notice me so I can get their products. And that really depends on the level of influencer you are. Look, we've seen for years, you've seen celebrity endorsers who are influencers. And you'll see so saying, that's why I use Axe, or that's why I use, or why I buy Chevy. And these are celebrities who are paid to endorse those products. And you know that, and they know that, and the people who are listening to them know that, but the endorsement still matters because these are people who are admired by the listeners. That's pretty blatant. A lot of the influencers you hear now are not like that. For example, I was listening the other day to one influencer promoting herself as, and this is a brand influencer, who basically literally is blatant about her influence. And I'm not going to go into what she calls herself because then you'll see who this is. But here's a piece from what she said.
Often my videos will appear here as well to a very affluent California demographic. So many of my videos go viral. I just started cooking in my kitchen, and naturally I began incorporating products from clients into my videos, and those went viral too. Even a comedy video for an evaporative cooler for Honeywell.
I hope you heard that. First, she's talking about an influent demographic, when I presume she meant influential. Secondly, she said, naturally, I began incorporating my clients' products into my videos of her cooking at home, which, by the way, according to what I saw on screen, she got 1.5 million views for one of them, at least that she was showing. How is that naturally? What if the client's products aren't good? What if the client's products really don't do anything but hurt your audience? What if it's the least good quality, let's call it the worst food you could add to a recipe, right? This isn't natural. If you're being an influencer, your job is to provide the best possible value to the people listening to you and believing in you and giving them what they need to make the best decision on whatever it is they need to make a decision on. And naturally incorporating your paid clients' products into something is not the idea, really. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that's going to go away just because I don't like it. It's going to be around for a long time. These are brand influencers, and they're basically shilling products like historic celebrity endorsers have done, and they're looking for money, product, and fame, and that's what they want. And they basically sit there and they basically talk about themselves all day and night, and that's what they do. But it doesn't only extend to brand influencers; it also extends to business influencers. there's an enormous number of business influencers out there, and I'll speak to a couple here and there. For example, in the world of CX, who have followings, who are spouting nothing more than really truisms. For example, there's a CX influencer who literally said, customer experience reminds us that we need to do better and do more. If that isn't the most duh comment I ever heard, and secondly, no, customer experience is not what reminds us to do that. Our whole life reminds us to do better and to do more. And the reality is, though, that you get all the sycophants who will support that, and that, of course, powers and strengthens and energizes the person spouting the truisms, and ultimately he or she get the kind of influence that really, to be honest, provides no actual value to those who are supporting and endorsing them. Think of it this way. There's no corroboration on what they're saying. There's no validation for what they're saying. They're just making statements. The same thing, a different CX influencer will basically find a research statistic, put it up, and say thoughts, and that's about 90% of what this person does. And yet, people buy into that, right? They're not spouting an idea of their own or an appraisal of something or an opinion on something that's corroborated by data and corroborated by information and provided to their listeners or their viewers or their whatever with some value. They're just spouting stuff that makes them sound cool, and then they get the sycophants to support that. One of the problems with all this is how influence and influencers got defined over the years. You can go look now, for example, how many times have you seen the 50 over 50, the 30 under 30, the 70 over 70, which is one I would fit into. And I've been on them since I was 40 something. So I've been on 40 over 40, 50 over 50, 50 under 50, 60 over 50, you name it. I've been on a lot of those lists, and they're meaningless. And one of the reasons they're meaningless is that typically those lists either have very little value, or just looking at some sort of active social media presence is the only thing that's defining their influence, meaning it's quantitative, or even worse, they're people who are registered with whatever service they have. One of them, for example, that I am not a fan of, even though I don't have anything against them personally, is Thinkers 360. Now, they do some interesting work here and there. Some of their articles and interviews are pretty good. But ultimately, they have the top 50 global influencers on this and this. And for years in CRM and that, I signed up for them for the free subscription many years ago and uploaded some stuff and forgot about it. And then I was showing up in CRM as number one or number two over those years. And then I realized all of a sudden that, wait a minute, the only reason I'm showing up is because I'm part of their services already. I'm registered with them. That's not criteria for influence. That's criteria for someone who's on their system, which is a very different way. The influence goes far beyond those registered with that company, so those are not legitimate lists. And I have friends who show up on those lists, and I'm happy for them, but at the same time, I am not a fan of Thinkers 360. So what I decided to do, because they were pitching me for premium services all the time, and there's always an inference, so it's not explicit, that I'll do better if I do that. But the reality is what I did instead was I said, nah, I'm pulling out completely. I'm shutting my accounts down. And isn't it interesting? The minute I shut my accounts down, I disappeared from their lists, which shows you how the value of it works. A lot of this goes even further back than these modern kind of register with our service things. And a lot of it has to do with what happened with Clout many years ago. If you remember Clout with a K, that was out there. And for a while, it was just a ragingly viral service and system that claimed to measure influence on social media and at the same time, influence overall of a particular person. And it was so viral at one point that you could literally get privileges at different businesses if your Clout score was above X level. Now, here's the problem with that. So, in the CRM world, I think I'm seen as, again, I'll put it in humble bragging terms because I don't really know why, but I'm seen as pretty influential. I have been for decades. I'm called the Godfather of CRM in the industry, although I honestly think that my nickname Grandfather is really the grandfather of CRM that somebody got wrong, because I found out not the oldest guy in the industry, because Francis Buttle said he was a year older than me, and Francis is a very well-established very respected CRM consultant. He turns out to be 73 and I'm 72. And then Rich Bone, I believe, is 71. So we're the three amigos of we're all senior. So I'm called the Godfather of CRM. My book's called The Bible of CRM. Back in the clout days, I would go on clout. I would be very, very active on social. That would show up. My clout score would skyrocket. Then I'd go on vacation for a week or two, and I had no social media activity. And then all of a sudden, my score went way down. And then you start realizing the clout, what they were measuring actually was how active on social media you were at a given moment. And that's it. Had nothing to do with influence. It forgot about any influence you might have had that was not related to Twitter, that was unrelated to even other social media. Like you might have impact in corporate boardrooms. You might have impact among large communities. You might have impact globally because you've spoken at the United Nations, whatever. You had impact in multiple ways that clout couldn't. Your score went down regardless. Clout corrupted it. And unfortunately, from my standpoint, the founders and owners of clout knew that it was not measuring impact and measuring influence and went along with it. So the question then, so that corrupted, not by itself, but among others, that corrupted a lot of what went on with the identification of the word influencer. The other thing that caused some confusion is that there are a whole different groups of influencers. There's also brand influencers, business influencers, blogging influencers, celebrity influencers, blah, 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 blah. But even more so, there's also now 4, let's call it quantitative sizes of influencers. There's mega influencers, there's micro influencers, there's macro influencers, there's nano influencers. And the irony is that a lot of influencer marketing is geared toward the larger influencers in a particular domain, but the reality is a lot of times the nano influencers, or people who typically have less than 1,000 followers, actually are the ones who have the most influence, because what they do is in a niche, those 1,000 or less followers are all highly influential, or not highly influential, highly targeted, focused people in a specific market or domain that will be of interest to someone who has an interest in a niche. So the nano influencer might be way more influential than the mega influencer in that niche or market. And that creates some confusion. So finally is the model to measure influence has been pretty badly done. Look, the person I know who has done the best work on influence has been Michael Wu. And if you would like to call him by his full title, Dr. Michael Wu, who right now is the current chief AI strategist at Pros, which is a wonderful company that I'll be talking about in later episodes when we launch the actual network in the fall. Back in 2012, he wrote a piece on the difficulties of measuring digital influence, and he basically talked about 3 problems that digital influence measurement had. One was no data. There's no independent source of influence data. And that goes to what I was saying about those services like Thinkers 360, which, as I said, aren't really operating independently. They're only operating within the own walls of their domain. So they can only validate their own algorithm by gut feeling and intuition. And Michael, basically, the way he puts it was, would you invest your money based on a stock model that's validated by gut feelings and intuition? I'm sure you wouldn't. Or if you would, that's the Brooklyn Bridge sale that everyone's been looking for years. The second thing that he said is problematic is overgeneralization. The algorithm is based on a handful of known influencers, right? And then they overgeneralize it to millions of users. And it just doesn't work. It's just too small a data pool for too large a data output. And then finally, invalid circular validation, which simply means this: they use likes and things like Michael calls it reciprocity data, like likes and retweets and so on, that are used in the algorithm. But the problem in that is because the algorithm's accuracy is compromised by the fact that there's no independent measure of it. You're already using something that's measuring what you're trying to measure, and consequently it's being impacted on what's measuring what you're trying to measure. So those are all problems. And then finally, it's just people have the desire to be famous, and the desire to stand out is very high, and they want to be loved. And so poor influence models, self-interested influencers who are not thinking about the value they're providing anyone, but thinking about how to get paid, how to get product, how to get loved, ends up in this massive squawking cacophony of people who are just making all this noise and pushing products in this vast kind of loud marketplace of product that's out there, or services that are out there, or ideas that are out there. And it says, ultimately, they're saying, look at me, I'm important, and stand out from the masses of people like me. And the like me are the ones who, of course, are the ones who follow them. So the question then becomes, how do you define, what would be an actual definition of influencer that you can hang your hat on, so to speak? Ultimately, an influencer should be people who have the trust of their peers and others who see them as a subject matter expert. In other words, a source of content specifically related to a product, service, idea, or methodology devoid of self-aggrandizement, right? Meaning you trust them for what they provide you, and that you are trusting that they are trying to provide you with important information that will help you make the kind of decisions that you want to make and provide you with the kind of information that you need to get that helps improve your life. That's who should be it. So the person is not only is influencing you because they are your trusted source and advisor on a specific subject, be it a product, a service, an idea, or whatever, that can impact your decisions on that product, service, or idea. So a true influencer is defined by the trust you have in them to provide you with the expertise that you need to help you make the decisions you need to make on a specific product, service, or idea. And I think with that, hopefully that provides you with the idea of what an influencer should be. I can certainly elaborate on this. Look, it's the first show. It's my first definition. Maybe it's too long, maybe it's not. In the meantime, you know what? I need a break. And we'll be back with PPN, which is, of course, the influencer focused, now new word meaning for influencer focused digital broadcasting. Now we'll be back with segment 4 of Talking Headless in just a moment.
You only get one life to live. The end is where the action is.
Welcome to Yes or No. Not a quiz show, but we will answer the question. When I began looking at the trend I wanted to look at initially, it was actually, to be honest, total experience, a trend which was identified by Gartner as an important strategic initiative for 2022. And they call it, of course, TX, which I usually think is the abbreviation for Texas. So we'll disagree there for a little bit. So they define TX, or total experience, as a strategy to create superior shared experiences by weaving together the 4 disciplines, i.e., the multi-experience, customer experience, employee experience, and user experience. And the premise is pretty straightforward. All of them interact with each other. All of them have dependencies with each other. In total, you have to account for and identify that kind of interaction and meshing and dependencies to come up with a strategy and programs for actually impacting all the stakeholders that are involved in the different facets of the 4 disciplines that they mentioned. And the reality is, who doesn't know that? And we all know that obviously the look and feel of something is going to impact whether someone wants to use it further. And while we can put to rest that whole happy employee equals happy customer, because that is just a myth, a truism, and a soundbite, not a reality, we do know that you still do have to have an employee experience that matters, that it will have some impact on the customer's experience. The customer has to actually have some sort of long-term emotional investment with the company, either good or bad. That won't be long-term if it's bad, but good or bad, that's ever evolving and ever changing. And at the same time, it goes with the UX, as I mentioned, to the employees and to the customers. Give us something that looks, feels good, is easy to navigate, and we'll be a lot happier using it than if we had a bad look, feel, and difficulty navigating. So that's who doesn't know that? But there was something when Gartner was talking about the 4 disciplines that struck me pretty quickly, which was the multi-experience. And while I'd seen the term floating around everywhere for a couple of years, I decided I would look more deeply into that because that had implications to me that were much more important and potentially could be pretty profound for moving forward in the universe we're in and aligning with the markets that we need to align with. We know that back in 2018, Jason Wong, who's a Gartner analyst, put forward the idea of multi-experience. And he basically identified it, and this is his definition in a blog post entitled, "It's About the Experience, Not the Channel," was something that was very important. He said, multi-experience is about designing and developing seamless and effortless experiences across apps, digital touch points, and this is where some additions come in, interaction modalities. Notice that I did not say channel. Many of you may think multi-experience is the same as multi-channel or omni-channel. It is not. Channel is an analog term, think TV channel, and we live in a digital world now, think streaming content. Channels are fine when applied to sales, marketing, and supply chain, but your customers don't think about what channel they're in. They just want to get things done on whatever digital touch point they choose and whichever modality they wish to interact through. They could care less about your channel. And you know what? Jason Wong is dead on when it comes to customers not caring about the channels. You've heard me, Brent Leary, Esteban Kolsky, Dennis Pomerantz, a number of people in the analyst world talking over the idea that customers don't care about channels, they care about the jobs that they got to get done. If I'm a customer, I come to your company. The reason I'm coming to your company is because I think that it provides me with something I need to get whatever job it is I need to get done. And what I want you to do is provide me with the means to make that the most, let's call it, the easiest experience I could possibly have doing this. Make it not, look, nothing is truly seamless, so we won't call it seamless, but let's just say you need to be able to take care of the things I need to be taken care of and do it so that I'm in and out and done. Because I don't love your company the way I love my spouse. I love your company in, let's say, more as a friend or as a institution that's said, you know what, we like you and we're going to try and help you do what it is you need to do and provide you with what you need to be provided with. And then I can go about my day afterwards and do all the other things I have to do in that day. Now, the question is, though, what makes multi-experience different than omni-channel or multi-channel? So I'm going to give you 4 definitions, and I'm going to throw, you notice I said multi-channel, omni-channel, multi-experience, but there's one in between there, which I'm calling channelist, that I want you to start thinking about. Because, look, you can go back years, and let's call it a decade, and we started seeing, maybe a little more really, we started seeing multi-channel strategies coming forward. And what they were essentially, okay, we're going to scan our customer base. We're going to find out what channel that they like to most interact with us on. And then we're going to deploy some funds and efforts into that channel and build it up so the customers have that channel. So it's basically scan multiple channels to find the single channel that works the best for both them and us. And that lasted, I don't know, 3 or 4 years when we started realizing, well, customers aren't communicating just in that one channel. That, in fact, they're communicating with multiple channels. And the way it was interpreted initially was on multiple channels, in multiple ways, the way they, at the moment that they care to communicate on those channels. And there was some studies done at the time by Aberdeen Group and others on omni-channel development and best in class. And they found, for example, that companies that deployed 7 channels, basically that spent time and investment on 7 channels, were the ones who were optimal when it came to providing the customers with what they need to interact and communicate with you as customers. And we all looked at that, and initially we said, oh, that's nice, even though it's a horrible phrase, because really, and this goes all the way back to, I'd say in my case, to about 2014 or 15 when I began talking through the idea of, no, customers don't care about the channels, they care about what has to get done. And I was trying to come up with a different phrase for it, and Jamie Anderson, who at the time was CMO of SAP CX or SAP CRM, actually came up with the idea of what he called channelless. And channelless meant, okay, they don't care. They're not really thinking about channels. So really, we shouldn't be thinking about channels. We should be thinking about the jobs that they got to get done and how to give them what they need to get those jobs done. And Thunderhead, which of course was beginning of this year acquired by Medallia, in their submission on the CRM Watchlist actually had the best definition of channelist that I had seen. And this is the way they communicated in January 2022. Customers do not think in terms of channels, touch points, and silos. They think in terms of what they need to get done. The essence of the channelless approach is the outside-in view, to understand and serve the needs of your customers from their perspective, not through the perspective of the functional silos and touch points of the organization. Now, I was hanging my hat on that one, and I liked it, and that's why I actually asked all the watch list participants to give me their definition of multiple things, including channelless. And some didn't believe in it, some did, and they gave me different definitions. Thunderheads was the best. But now we have Jason Wong all the way back in 2018 talking through this and actually taking it a step further, because he's talking about the stakeholders' entire experience with a single application off a wide variety of digital touch points. And that could be websites, mobile apps, chatbots, AR, VR headsets, wearables, smartwatches, and it uses all the senses. It could be touch, voice, vision, motion, and it could be touchless, by the way, contactless too. But it could be all of that. So you're dealing you're not dealing with just devices. You're dealing with entire modalities that are tied to human senses as well, and then the emotional and behavioral impact that those sensate experiences have on the individual stakeholder. You're actually taking channelless and taking it to another level. And the interesting thing is that there are some examples of that in very early stages that are out there. So for example, I think the best one I've seen is almost the standard case study that's being used by a lot of sources is Domino's Pizza, of all things. It's really not one, because I don't honestly love their pizza very much, but boy, they are a progressive company when it comes to thinking. So Domino's has, I think it's anywhere.dominos.com, and it's called Domino's Anywhere. And if you go there, you will see the ability to interact with them on, as they said, order your favorite oven-baked goodness on your favorite devices. And then they have Google Home, Alexa, Slack, Messenger, Zero Clock, text, tweet, car, smart TV, voice, smartwatch. Now, you don't often see that. You often see what we said earlier, website. You do see mobile devices. Now, but Domino's is actually taking it to another level where you can use all your senses on different hardware as well as the digital services or digital products, and get the kind of overarching results that you're looking for. And the fascinating thing is that the impact on a number of areas can be seen immediately with multi-experience. So for example, just think metaverse now. And I'm not going to get into the metaverse. I'm sick of hearing the damn term at this point. But the reality is, when you're bringing in all these hardware devices, you're bringing in something of a whole other level of capability and discussion around what the customer's journey is, even, or your employees' experiences at the site or in the course of their job or in any given day. Think about customer journeys. All of a sudden, customer journeys are involving a whole area of activity, and then providing data that will identify an emotional and behavioral result for an individual that you wouldn't have had prior to this. So it impacts the way customer journeys are both measured and observed, the way employees are interacting with their own companies. It brings in and aligns with the whole discussion around the metaverse. You're talking about a significant number of changes, transformation, and evolutions in the overall experience and what's necessary to provide the appropriate programs and strategies for optimizing that experience. And TX, again, it's a useful container, but multi-experience, MX, is actually where you're seeing the evolution. Now, that said, Gartner is identifying what they call multi-experience platforms and taking a quick look at those too. And there's some pure plays out there like OutSystems and Kingery, and I think there was another one, I don't know, there's a dozen of them. And you've seen some evolutions of companies like WalkMe, which used to be Interactive Help, which is now Digital Adoption Platform, which is identified by, and a very good one, which is identified by Gartner as part of the multi-experience platforms that are out there. And at the same time, you also see a lot of the heavy hitters and Gartner identifying their platforms. And this is where I start having a few doubts in terms of the platforms themselves. They identify Salesforce Lightning, SAP Extension Suite, Microsoft Power Apps, ServiceNow's platform, Oracle's Mobile Hub Cloud Services, and Pega's platform as multi-experience platforms. Look, all of them existed long before the term, or at least somewhat before the term multi-experience platforms. Sounds like a rebranding, re-identification, which is a little bit self-serving, really, by either, and I don't know where this is coming from, either the vendor or Gartner when it comes to multi-experience platforms. I don't know that there's been a really good definition of a genuine multi-experience platform, which they can prove. And Gartner makes a recommendation point when it comes to the platforms. You should operate through mobile apps because that's where most people are doing something. Well, that's true. But I thought the whole idea of multi-experience platforms is that if mobile is the delivery vehicle, it's the same time, there's a lot of different other facets to it that mobile becomes a part of, not a dominant, total, overarching framework for only. So I'm a little bit up in the air about that at this point. So while I'm not terribly up in the air at the moment about the idea of multi-experience, I am up in the air about what's being called multi-experience platforms. To be fair, I don't have a tremendous amount of research that I've done yet on that. But for example, I see Pega's platform, and then the one that I see identified is Pega's platform for field workforce management in network operations. I'm not exactly sure how that qualifies as a multi-experience platform. It seems to qualify as a platform for field workforce management in network operations, which is not the same thing, at least in my head. And maybe it's my 72-year-old brain cells are a little bit fried, but one way or the other, I think that's a bit of an issue. So the question then becomes, given that we still lack a ton of truly multi-experience, let's call it best practices, we still lack a lot of case studies and use cases. There's a lot of use cases, but let's say we lack a lot of case studies of implementation besides Domino's, and I think somebody mentioned BMW in one of their geographical locales as another one that's doing it. I think there are some questions out there. So first thing is, does this thing have legs? I think because of its way of aligning very well with the metaverse, going a step beyond channelless, bringing in human senses and hardware devices that ordinarily were not brought into discussions around customer journeys or employee engagement, etc. I think it does actually take the next step potentially in where we have to start looking at, or in what we have to start looking at, I should say. But do we have things to be concerned about? Yeah. For example, Gartner denies that channels have anything to do with this, regardless of the way customers are thinking about channels. And I agree with them and Jason Wang 100%. And Jason, if you're listening, I doubt you are, but if you are listening, we'd love to have you on CRM Playaz to talk about this with you. And regardless of what he says and what I say and what all these others say, there are channels involved in this. This is not completely channelless, right? That said, it's trying to take the step past it and add things, the modalities it's trying to add really change the nature of what even a channel is, and hopefully get us to the idea of help the customer do the job they need to do in the fashion in which they need to solve the problem. Make the ordinary, make the experience great by doing that. Secondly, I think there's only on the platform side, there's just a few, what Gartner at least is saying, and Forrester, I think to some extent, but at least Gartner is saying are pure play MXPs, and the other ones, if you listen to the ones like Salesforce and Oracle's and SAPs and ServiceNows and Pegasystems, they seem to be just renaming really existing systems, doing something else, and they're not genuine pure plays, and I think that might be overemphasized. I will say this, that Gartner says that by 2023, 25% of mobile experiences will be built using these MXPs. But I have a lot of caution. There's caution here. Okay, caution. We need the evolution of the technology itself. And we need some identification, some clear identification of the use cases, which, again, they may be out there. I haven't seen them. We need some criteria being set for what an MXP is, as opposed to a renamed CX platform, just because it's a hot term at the moment. We need more actual case studies of companies doing this. And we're going to need some clarity of definition. But on the whole, if these tweaks are made, and they're just, trust me, these are just, let's call them relatively dramatic tweaks. They're not major overhauls. I think this thing has legs. If I'm scoring it on a scale of 0 to 10, I give this one a solid 8 for its stickiness, its impact, and its ability to continue for years to come as an important addition to the strategies, programs, and the transformation of the market. So the answer on this one is yes, 8.0. Okay, everyone, that's it for today. I will tell you, this is supposed to be 30 minutes. It's clearly way over that, so you're probably sick and tired of me. So let me just get you out of here.
Mashed up, bashed up, and broken into two. I didn't know I was pretty till I took a look at you, and I'm rolling. Yeah, I'm still rolling. Baby, there ain't nothing I can lose, and I sure got the blues.
See you later, everyone.
Hey, take it away, boys.
This has been a Playaz Productions Network digital broadcast.